Hi! It's time to finish the VK3001 Porsche. Better to kill it now before it turns into a Stuck, so we have to complete the conversion, paint the whole thing, weather it down and get it to a good finish. My name is Kai, you're watching Tank Brusher, thanks for subscribing. Let me show you guys the modules I ended up with. The complete thing was primed last episode, of course. This episode we have to finish it somehow, and therefore I left upper and lower hull separated. The tracks were glued on with the running gear, only push fitted into the lower hull. That's no problem removing them yet, but the tracks stick of course to the drive sprocket, and since this is a taper fit, that's self-locking and quite hard to remove. I don't like this one, what Hobby Boss did here to us. Okay, jump forward. The vehicle painted in its first layer, and reviewing my process, it's not necessary to go for this red primer on a dark gray. I have to remove this connection piece on the rear compartment. That's not the engine compartment per se. That's, I don't know. It's just hollow on the pictures. We can't see what's in there. But it had not yet any cover on. So we can't say how this looked in the end, since it was never present not completed on the final model. Now my rear firewall looks a little bit messy, but so does the paint job. I went first for a distraction layer painting this. That's gray, then a hairspray layer, and then another gray, and I didn't like it. Hey, I want to learn, so I have to experiment. I'm sorry. I'm falling back to the color modulation using the panel lighting technique, selecting 3 different gray tones for the upper and 3 darker gray tones for the lower hull. This is now something I'm familiar with and I can work with, and I'm sure I can bring it to a good looking result. At least a shelf standard, I would say. The model is still missing the window glasses, and this is something I would like to take care of now. My Silhouette Portrait 2 cutting plotter makes a short process of the carrier film or the protection film for these sticky cutting mats, and these make perfect window glasses. On the photographs of the real vehicle, it's quite clear that these windows were covered up, but not with actual glass. The reflections are uneven and some kind of foil was used, I guess. With the windows at hand, I can finish up the front plate and glue the whole thing onto the vehicle. To glue in these window glasses, I use Contacta Clear from Revell. It does not fog up the polycarbonate foil just like a super glue could do. Once the inserts are in, the whole plate gets super glued onto the vehicle, and the fit is quite good, even though the front plate was a little bit bent due to me not having a good means of curing resin equally from all sides to prevent twisting. Anyways, let's deal with the details and the weathering. Starting with the running gear, we work our way up to the model. So let's actually start with the idler wheel. I use a gunmetal, that's a black metal, for getting the running surface a little bit into a metallic finish, and follow up with chipping, cleaning up the rims, making them a little bit more used or rusty. It's tempting to lay in a second layer of brush chipping using a lighter gray, but that goes a little bit too far for the idler wheel, I think, since it will be subject to mud later down the road. Using a graphite pen, I give the rims a little bit a more metallic appearance before I switch into the wash. I don't need to tell you the basic concept of a pin wash. It's just the cleanup process that I use here again, stippling in the excess instead of removing it, giving a first layer of distraction or grease, grime, effectively a first layer of contrast and interest on the surface of this vehicle. The next step is highlighting the details that stand out. These bolts, for example, get a visit with a little bit a lighter gray. For the tracks I chose a very easy and simple approach that is easy to learn and yields a good result in most cases, and that's just spraying it with a rust brown, that's a dust brown, Staubbraun, that's the translation, and then I follow up with dry brushing the contact surface that would get a little bit wear and tear from driving over concrete. This vehicle was tested inside and outside, so we can expect quite a little bit of metallic appearance on the tracks, at least I guess, and that's followed up with the dark wash on top of it that tones down the already used black metal for the dry brush. And the wash, yeah, it gives depth as always. I don't wash only the recesses, I give it a complete coat, making the wash more into a filter. And once that's dried, of course, we get a first impression of how this looks. It's a little bit more dimensional, and I follow up on this first effect impression with a second wash. That's the same product, a dark wash, but only affected the recesses, giving the complete thing again a little bit more dimension. Before I can throw on the tracks onto the vehicle, I need at least to get a little bit a mud effect going. This is thick soil from Ammo by Mick, the heavy mud range, and I selected it for it is a little bit darker, more ochreish than I would usually use as the bright color. And since I'm planning on doing a diorama together with the VK3001, I'm not going to finish the mud effect completely. That's just getting it started, getting a first impression of a dirty undercarriage, and that's what I'm going for. That's just applied on the bottom edge and the top edge, and then stippling it and streaking it together until we get a nice looking distribution of the first effect. Later, when I'm knowing where the vehicle is sitting in, I will go in with the darker mud colors and readjust the final effect. Looking at the vehicle with the tracks mounted, this looks quite well for putting it in the shelf, and it's not yet progressed too far to get it into a diorama later on. But now let's talk about the actual weathering of the vehicle. I first start by moisturizing. No, sorry, that's quite repetitive. I work in sections, of course, and I try to keep the products I use to a bare minimum. Since I work in sections, I can show you here a vertical area step by step, and then we can move on into looking at a horizontal one. I use this dark wash on the moistened surface to get a first impression of what I can do with the shapes of this pale white open surface that's quite boring, and I stipple in the excess of the wash, claiming the first parts of this surface for more contrast, more effect, more what's going on. A second layer is my first earth or dust effect. I selected this Kursk soil for it being a little bit ochreish. It's not too bright. We have to remember this dark gray is really dark. I pushed the ISO so it looks like a neutral gray, but we're just very dark here. So if we select something that would be an actual dust color, it would stain the surface immediately and create too much unwanted contrast. That would already look like a faded whitewash, and a darker earth tone would create a competition between the brush chipping I'm doing next and the dust effect itself. So looking for something in the middle here. The brush chipping is done with a natural hair brush with a very fine tip and the Ammo by Mick chipping color, followed by a light gray for this typical two-tone brush chipping. That effect works quite nice and it's easy to learn. It is much more controlled, of course, than the hairspray, and it does its effect. It carries its weight, I think. And if we have a look around the vehicle, the surfaces, I get away quite well with doing this simple 3 effect weathering on this one. It looks quite used, but not overly overused or misused. I think we're on a good way here. Okay, that was enough of the why. Now let's do the how actually weathering the surface. I like to start with these enamel products on a wet surface, just moistening it with this enamel odorless thinner. That's in turpentine, a good refined one. And the dark wash is applied how you would apply a wash, of course. After this, I look for everything I can get a little bit more interest in, just adding some brush chipping here on this access hatch to the crew compartment. On this vehicle, the drive motors are in the front, the electric ones, so I think that would get access to them. The brush chipping is followed by the dark wash as a first layer of discoloration, or framing I would like to call it, just getting a little bit from the inside edges into the actual surface, claiming some space, making some stains, some dirt, some mud, some grime. There's actually relatively little interference between these enamel products and the acrylic ones, so I can now come back and do the second layer of the brush chipping. What you see me doing here is something I've not done yet, and that's using a filter. I selected this one for a dust layer, something that settles into the recesses, discolorating the horizontal surfaces against the vertical ones. And I'm quite new to this product. I have used filters in the past, but yeah, I don't use them how you would expect them to be used as a first step of the weathering. I like them to tone down existing weathering. Underneath my color modulation is a hairspray distraction layer. It didn't work out, but it turns out that filter is based on alcohol, not turpentine or enamel thinner, and it eats into the hairspray layer immediately. Yes, it was sealed up, but it leaves damages to my already painted area. That's why I have to do the dust effects under a little bit a forced hand here. That's earth. That's a little bit darker, and that's what was I meant first with having a too dark earth tone will get into competition with the brush chipping, but to get a large area covered with dust or mud deposits, earth deposits, it's important to have different color tones just to set up some layers, making it more interesting. Otherwise it would be just a blob of paint, I guess. For me that's earth and coarse soil, and I'm just switching back and forth between them and stippling it on with a damp brush. The surface is not moistened this time, the brush is not dripping wet of thinner nor of product, it's just damp enough to blend the edges of my mud stains or dirt stains here. Blending and layering is the ultimate process to get good looking dust stains or dirt stains, and this is what I show is far from being a top level scale modeler, of course. But yeah, let's the first steps in getting an effect that actually looks like it could be turned into something. The whole thing needs to be iterated over and over until we get the final impression we are after. And looking at the final effect, the damage is repaired, and in the end I think it adds more than it took. Into the final weathering steps, of course, rusting the muffler or the exhaust. I don't think this thing would be completely rusted through, to be honest, since it's a prototype vehicle. It was used in testing and trialing. It was tested a lot and it met its limits, so having a little bit a rusty surface is quite good, I think. I start by just sponge chipping the complete surface first in the same gray I used for my base color, following with yellow, with black, with orange, giving it just, or building up just these rust effects, this complete surface. We don't need to use oil paints all the time, that's just acrylic paint just layered on top of each other, and this doesn't look too bad to start with. Of course, oil paints are best for blending, and this is why I switched to my oil brushers, getting the exhaust, the mufflers, the exit bit of it a little bit more black onto it. Snot, I think, is the word for ruß. And since the whole thing is still not rusted through completely, I chose a neutral gray for a filter layer. That's an oil paint. I stipple it on to give it some texture, but I don't want to overpower the sponge chipping underneath, just having it as a semi-transparent layer on top of it. And I think this works out fine in the end. There's some deterioration going, but not quite too much. Last step, of course, is dealing with the rear or tail lights. I just paint them red for having no better option at the moment, and going over this with a gloss varnish to give it a little bit of shine. All in all, that's it. Here I would like to stop the weathering process of this vehicle. Next to its 4501, the larger brother of it, it is quite a big vehicle. It's a large vehicle, and I measured it. It comes close. Yeah, of course, a caliber makes an unhappy modeler, but next to the VK3001 from the Army Ordnance Department, or Henschel, there's one tank of these twos more looking like a breakthrough solution than the other. I don't know. I let you guess what's the better project in the end. Most of you know, of course. I hope you find this vehicle quite a little bit interesting. I don't expect you find it that interesting than I do. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, please leave me a subscription. And if not, thumbs up, thumbs down, at your discretion. I would be happy to see you guys next week when we start with a Stuck. Happy modeling and take care.